Most people assume that having few friends is a flaw. They label it as social failure, emotional weakness, or lack of confidence. But what they don't see is that some of the most psychologically grounded individuals in history lived with very small social circles. Not because they were rejected, but because they were selective. In a world that rewards visibility and constant interaction, choosing depth over volume quietly rewires how a person thinks, feels, and moves through life. And the traits that emerge from this choice are rare, not because they're superior, but because they're uncomfortable for most people to develop. People with few friends are often misunderstood because their strength doesn't announce itself. They don't need crowds to validate them. They don't perform socially to feel accepted. And while others chase connection to escape themselves, these individuals learn how to sit with their thoughts, regulate their emotions, and build an inner world that doesn't collapse under pressure. This video isn't about loneliness. It's about the psychology of social selectivity and the 5 rare traits that quietly shape people who live this way. Before we go deeper, subscribe to Quiet Power. This channel isn't about motivation or noise. It's about clarity, restraint, and psychological strength that doesn't need approval. If you've ever felt different for having a small circle, or none at all, stay with this video until the end. You may realize that what you thought was a limitation is actually the foundation of your strength. People with few friends often develop a trait most people never fully build: emotional self-sufficiency. This does not mean they lack emotion, nor does it mean they reject closeness. It means they are not dependent on constant social feedback to regulate their inner state. While many people rely on conversation, validation, or presence to stabilize their emotions, socially selective individuals learn to do this work internally. They become their own emotional anchor. This changes everything about how they experience life. When someone does not have a large social circle, they are forced to confront themselves more often. There is no constant distraction, no emotional outsourcing. Loneliness, boredom, discomfort, and uncertainty surface more clearly. Most people escape these states through noise. The emotionally self-sufficient person stays. Over time, they learn that emotions rise and fall on their own when observed calmly. This creates a quiet confidence that does not depend on reassurance or approval. This trait often begins unintentionally. A person may withdraw socially due to mismatch, exhaustion, or disinterest. But what develops in that space is powerful. They begin to notice patterns in their thoughts. They recognize emotional triggers early. Instead of reacting outwardly, they process inwardly. This reduces impulsive behavior and emotional leakage. When they do speak or act, it is deliberate. That restraint is often mistaken for coldness, but it is actually regulation. Emotional self-sufficiency also changes how conflict is handled. People with few friends are less reactive because they are not emotionally hungry. They do not need to win arguments to feel whole. They do not escalate tension to feel seen. They can sit with discomfort without rushing to resolve it through words. This often gives them psychological leverage in tense situations, even if they never intend to use it. Another result of this trait is clarity. When emotions are not constantly influenced by social input, thinking becomes cleaner. Decisions are not filtered through fear of exclusion or desire for approval. Instead, they are guided by internal alignment. This makes these individuals slower to commit, but more consistent once they do. They don't say yes easily, but when they do, it matters. This self-sufficiency also affects attachment. People with few friends tend to form fewer bonds, but those bonds are deeper. Because they do not seek connection to fill emotional gaps, they connect from wholeness. They are not trying to be completed. This makes them selective, but also stable. Their relationships are not built on dependency, but on mutual respect and autonomy. Many people misunderstand this and assume emotional self-sufficiency means emotional distance. In reality, it allows for deeper intimacy. When someone is not afraid of being alone, they do not cling. They listen more. They observe more. They give others space to be themselves. This creates safety, not absence. This trait is rare because it requires enduring emotional silence without escaping it. Most people never do this long enough to benefit from it. They fill the space too quickly. Those with few friends often have no choice. And over time, what starts as isolation becomes inner strength. Emotional self-sufficiency also builds resilience. When disappointment happens, it is processed internally before being expressed. When rejection occurs, it is examined rather than dramatized. This does not eliminate pain, but it prevents collapse. The person bends inward, not outward. They recover faster, quieter, and more completely. This resilience is why such individuals often appear calm during crisis. Their nervous system is accustomed to operating without external regulation. Silence does not alarm them. Stillness does not threaten them. They are familiar with internal terrain. That familiarity creates steadiness. Another subtle outcome is reduced social anxiety. While socially selective people may appear introverted, they are often less anxious than socially dependent individuals. Why? Because their sense of worth is not on trial during interaction. They are not scanning faces for approval. They are not adjusting themselves constantly to fit. They enter conversations whole, not seeking to extract validation. This makes their presence feel grounded. People often describe them as calm, thoughtful, or intense without knowing why. It is because emotional self-sufficiency creates coherence. Thoughts, emotions, and actions align more closely. There is less contradiction between inner and outer states. This trait also explains why people with few friends are often misunderstood. Emotional self-sufficiency does not advertise itself. It does not perform. In a culture that equates openness with health and sociability with success, inner regulation goes unnoticed. But it quietly shapes a person's entire psychological architecture. The danger of this trait, if left unconscious, is emotional isolation. Self-sufficiency must not become self-exile. Healthy individuals learn when to open and when to close. But when balanced, emotional self-sufficiency becomes one of the strongest foundations a person can build. People with few friends often carry this foundation without realizing its value. They may even see it as a flaw, but it is not. It is a skill forged in silence, refined through solitude, and expressed through restraint. This is the first rare trait, and it sets the stage for everything that follows. People who have few friends are often guided by something invisible but powerful: high internal standards. These standards are not about superiority or judgment of others. They are about alignment. When someone lives by internal rules rather than social expectations, their circle naturally becomes smaller. Not everyone can meet those standards, and not everyone needs to. This isn't rejection, it's filtration. High internal standards shape how a person evaluates behavior, conversation, and energy. These individuals are sensitive to inconsistency, insincerity, and emotional chaos. They notice when words don't match actions. They feel discomfort in shallow interactions. Over time, their nervous system learns what feels right and what doesn't. When something feels misaligned, they quietly step back instead of forcing connection. This trait often develops early. Some people grow up observing instability, hypocrisy, or emotional volatility. Rather than normalizing it, they internalize a rule. Closeness should feel safe, respectful, and real. That rule becomes a filter. They don't tolerate manipulation disguised as humor, or intimacy that demands self-betrayal. As a result, many social opportunities are declined without drama. High internal standards also affect communication. People with this trait speak less, but with more intention. They dislike filler conversation that exists only to maintain social comfort. This doesn't mean they lack warmth. It means they value meaning. When they speak, they prefer substance over performance. Silence feels more honest than pretending interest. This makes them appear selective, even distant. But what's actually happening is discernment. Their social energy is not unlimited, and they refuse to spend it on interactions that feel draining or hollow. This restraint preserves psychological resources. Over time, it strengthens self-respect. They trust their internal signals more than external pressure. Another outcome of high internal standards is resistance to peer influence. People with few friends are often less affected by trends, groupthink, or social comparison. They are not immune, but they are slower to adopt beliefs simply because they are popular. This independence protects them from identity diffusion. They know who they are without constant mirroring. This trait also explains why these individuals may feel misunderstood. Others interpret selectivity as judgment. In reality, it's self-protection. High standards are rarely about others being not enough. They are about the person refusing to lower themselves into environments that require compromise of values or energy. High internal standards shape emotional boundaries. These individuals do not overshare easily. They do not reveal themselves quickly. Trust is earned gradually, through consistency rather than charm. This often frustrates people who bond through speed rather than depth. But when trust is finally given, it is stable. This stability creates powerful relationships, even if they are few. Friends who pass the filter experience loyalty, presence, and honesty. There is less drama because expectations are clear. Conflict, when it arises, is addressed directly or not at all. Passive aggression rarely survives in this psychological environment. High internal standards also affect romantic relationships. People with few friends often remain single longer, not due to inability, but due to unwillingness to settle. They sense when connection is based on distraction rather than compatibility. They would rather be alone than misaligned. This choice builds inner congruence, even if it costs social approval. Another subtle aspect of this trait is patience. These individuals are not in a rush to belong. They understand that forced connection eventually collapses. They wait. This patience is not passive. It is grounded in trust that alignment matters more than access. However, high internal standards can become rigid if unexamined. When standards turn into walls rather than filters, isolation increases. Healthy individuals remain flexible without becoming porous. They adjust standards based on growth, not fear. When balanced, this trait becomes strength rather than limitation. This balance allows people with few friends to navigate social environments calmly. They do not over-invest. They do not over-explain. They engage when aligned and withdraw when not. This creates an aura of quiet self-respect that others feel instinctively. High internal standards also protect against emotional exhaustion. Because these individuals say no often, their yes carries weight. Their energy remains intact. They are not constantly recovering from interactions that drain them. This preserves mental clarity and emotional regulation. In a world that encourages constant connection, high internal standards feel rebellious. They go against accessibility culture, but they preserve identity. People with this trait don't chase belonging. They allow belonging to form naturally when alignment exists. This is why their social circle remains small. Not because they are unwanted, but because they are unwilling to trade integrity for inclusion. Their few connections are not accidental. They are chosen carefully, maintained quietly, and valued deeply. This is the second rare trait, and it quietly reshapes how these individuals move through every relationship they encounter. People who have few friends often possess a rare psychological trait that quietly shapes their entire social world. Emotional self-sufficiency. This does not mean emotional coldness, avoidance, or lack of need for others. It means their emotional regulation, validation, and stability do not depend on constant external reinforcement. They can feel deeply without needing to be constantly witnessed. Emotional self-sufficiency develops when a person learns, consciously or unconsciously, that their inner world is their responsibility. They do not outsource meaning, reassurance, or self-worth to others. Instead of asking, "Do you see me?" they ask, "Do I see myself?" This shift alone changes how relationships form and how many are required. Because of this trait, these individuals rarely chase connection out of loneliness. Loneliness may still appear, but it is not feared. It is tolerated, explored, and often transformed into reflection. Silence does not threaten them. Solitude does not erase them. They know who they are even when no one is responding. This emotional independence often begins early. Some learned it because support was inconsistent. Others learned it because they were encouraged to think inwardly. Regardless of origin, the result is the same. They become internally anchored. They feel before they react. They process before they speak. This slows their social rhythm compared to most people. As a result, they struggle in environments built on emotional exchange rather than emotional depth. Many friendships depend on constant sharing, mutual venting, or emotional urgency. Emotionally self-sufficient people do not require this. They do not need to narrate every feeling to feel real. They don't seek constant reassurance that they matter. This can create distance without intention. Another consequence is selective vulnerability. These individuals do open up, but only when it feels safe and meaningful. They don't confuse disclosure with intimacy. They understand that emotional closeness without trust creates fragility. So they wait, and many people interpret that waiting as disinterest. Emotionally self-sufficient people also handle conflict differently. They do not explode to be heard. They do not collapse to be saved. When something hurts, they retreat inward first. They seek understanding before resolution. This often prevents unnecessary escalation, but it also prevents bonding through drama. Drama is a shortcut to connection for many people. Emotional intensity creates illusionary closeness. But those who are emotionally self-sufficient do not rely on intensity to feel alive. They prefer steadiness. Calm feels safer than chaos. And calm relationships are rarer than dramatic ones. This trait also affects how they receive support. They appreciate it, but they don't depend on it. They don't lean heavily unless necessary. This can make others feel unnecessary or excluded. But in reality, it is about dignity. They value standing on their own emotional feet. Emotionally self-sufficient people often become the stable ones in relationships. Others lean on them. Others vent to them. Others seek their calm. Over time, this creates imbalance. They give presence, but receive little resonance. Eventually, they step back, not from resentment, but from exhaustion. This contributes to having fewer friends. They are not unwilling to connect. They are unwilling to carry emotional weight that isn't reciprocal. When relationships become one-sided, they quietly loosen their grip. No announcements, no ultimatums, just distance. Another misunderstood aspect of emotional self-sufficiency is joy. These individuals do not need an audience to enjoy life. They can experience fulfillment privately. A walk, a book, a thought can be enough. Because joy is internal, it does not require sharing to be validated. This threatens social norms. Many people bond through shared experiences and constant interaction. Emotional self-sufficiency disrupts this pattern. It removes urgency. It removes dependency. And without dependency, many relationships lose their glue. However, when emotionally self-sufficient people do form friendships, they are resilient. They do not collapse under absence. They do not panic during silence. They trust continuity without constant contact. Their relationships survive distance, time, and change. This trait also allows them to walk away when necessary. They do not stay simply to avoid being alone. They understand that loneliness inside a relationship is more damaging than solitude outside it. This insight alone reduces their tolerance for unhealthy dynamics. Emotionally self-sufficient people are often misunderstood as detached, but detachment is avoidance. Self-sufficiency is presence without dependence. They feel deeply. They care fully. They simply do not lose themselves in the process. Over time, this creates a smaller social circle by design, not by defect. Their friendships are fewer, but calmer, quieter, more grounded. They are not built on constant reassurance, but on mutual respect. This is the third rare trait, and it explains why people with few friends often appear strong in silence, steady in chaos, and comfortable standing alone. Their independence is not a rejection of others. It is a commitment to themselves. People who have few friends often live under a quiet misunderstanding. From the outside, their small circle looks like absence. From the inside, it feels like intention. This final trait is not about personality, trauma, or preference alone. It is about selective connection, the ability to choose depth over breadth without resentment, apology, or fear. Selective connection means they do not treat relationships as collectibles. They do not measure their social value by how many people know their name, message their phone, or show up in photos. They measure connection by resonance, by whether a relationship expands their inner world or drains it. This makes their social lives look empty to many, but structured to them. This trait is rare because it requires discernment, and discernment requires self-trust. Most people keep many friends because they are unsure which connections truly matter. They hedge emotionally. They spread themselves thin to avoid choosing wrong. But selective individuals are willing to choose fewer and risk misunderstanding. They understand something subtle. Every relationship costs energy, attention, time, emotional bandwidth, and energy is finite. Instead of spending it everywhere, they invest it where alignment exists. This is not selfishness. It is conservation. People with this trait feel the difference between noise and nourishment. They can sense when conversation is merely filling space versus when it is building meaning. Once you can feel that difference, it becomes impossible to unfeel it. Casual connection starts to feel heavy. Obligatory socializing feels hollow. Because of this, they often withdraw from social systems built on routine rather than relevance. Group chats that never end. Friendships sustained by history but lacking presence. Circles where everyone talks but no one listens. They leave quietly, not in anger, but in honesty. Selective connection also requires comfort with being misunderstood. Many people assume fewer friends means social failure, emotional damage, or arrogance. Those who possess this trait do not rush to correct that assumption. They let others think what they want. Explaining would require diluting truth to satisfy perception. This trait often matures with time. Early on, these individuals may try to force themselves into social norms. They attend gatherings they don't enjoy, maintain friendships that feel misaligned. Over time, the cost becomes too high. Fatigue replaces effort, and clarity replaces guilt. They begin to realize that not every connection deserves maintenance. Some relationships are seasonal. Some exist to teach, not stay. Letting go does not mean something failed. It means it finished. Another aspect of selective connection is tolerance for distance. These individuals do not equate closeness with frequency. They don't need constant interaction to feel bonded. They value continuity of understanding over constant presence. This allows their friendships to survive silence without anxiety. This trait also explains why they rarely chase people. They do not pursue attention to feel chosen. They assume that those meant to stay will meet them halfway. When effort becomes one-sided, they interpret it as information, not a challenge. Selective people are highly sensitive to imbalance. They notice when they are the ones initiating, listening, accommodating. And instead of confronting dramatically, they adjust quietly. Less availability, less engagement. Eventually, distance forms naturally. This is often mistaken for emotional detachment. But detachment is avoidance. Selectivity is precision. They care deeply, but only where care is mutual. This trait also affects how they show love. They are not performative. They don't broadcast loyalty. They demonstrate it through consistency, presence, and restraint. Their affection is quiet but durable. Because of this, they may feel lonely at times, but they rarely feel empty. Their inner world is full. Their thoughts keep them company. Their values anchor them. They do not depend on social stimulation to feel alive. This makes them difficult to manipulate. They cannot be easily controlled through approval, exclusion, or attention. Social pressure loses power when someone does not fear being alone. This independence unsettles people who rely on group dynamics to feel secure. Selective connection also sharpens boundaries. These individuals know when to say no without explanation. They don't overextend to avoid disappointing others. They accept that disappointing someone is sometimes the price of self-respect. Over time, this trait leads to a smaller but stronger social structure. Fewer friendships, but deeper trust. Less communication, but more meaning. They may not always be surrounded, but they are rarely unseen by those who matter. This is why people with few friends often appear grounded. They are not pulled in multiple directions. Their identity is not fragmented across social roles. They are consistent because they are not constantly adapting to please. In a world that equates connection with quantity, selective connection is an act of quiet rebellion. It says, I choose presence over popularity. And that choice reshapes everything. Having few friends is not the absence of social skill. It is often the presence of self-awareness. It is knowing when connection adds and when it subtracts. It is choosing peace over performance. This final trait does not mean everyone with few friends is the same, but it explains why many of them walk calmly through a noisy world, unhurried, unpressured, and intact. They are not missing out. They are choosing differently. If this felt familiar, don't explain it. Just sit with it. Not everything meaningful needs to be shared loudly. If you want more calm clarity like this, stay close.